Good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me clearly. My name is Kosiye Chunduli. I'm from the Research Capacity Development Unit at the Postgraduate School, University of Johannesburg. I'll be your moderator for this morning's session, which is titled Guidance on the Role of External Examiners and Strategies for Sourcing External Examiners. So our facilitator for this morning session, colleagues, is Prof. Pillay, who has joined us to guide us or to give us some tips and guidance on how we can source external examiners and the role they play. So we are honored, Prof, to have you as our facilitator, and thank you for honoring our invite in facilitating this very important workshop. I hope and believe that colleagues will learn something from your presentation. Colleagues, please do note that this workshop is recorded, so we will share the recording of this workshop with everyone who have attended, and also upload the recording as well as the presentations of this workshop to our digital platforms, which is the PDRF module communities, as well as the supervisor module community. If you are not registered or enrolled, you are more than welcome to email us on supervision course or RCT inquiries, and then we will assist you with the enrollment. Also, we will upload to the RCT management system, which is the platform that is available on your ULink. Under services, the last option is RCTMS. That is where you will find all our services, be able to access our previous recordings and be able to book for any upcoming workshop, as well as to download your certificate of attendance. So, colleagues, before I can introduce our facilitator, I have some few housekeeping rules. I will enable all your mics. Please do make sure that there is no background noise from your side. And if you do have a question, you can just raise a hand or alternatively type under the chat, and I will notify Prof that someone has a question. Prof, if I may ask, would you prefer to take questions at the end of a presentation or along the way as you go with your presentation?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ntuli. I would actually prefer to have the questions at the end of my presentation. My presentation itself is not very long because I've made provision for a proactive question answer session.
Okay. Okay, noted, Prof. Thank you. So, colleagues, if you have questions, and then you can just type them, and then during Q&A session at the end of Prof's presentation, that is whereby you can just unmute your mic and ask your questions. I'll be also sharing a feedback evaluations toward the end of the session. Colleagues, we kindly request you to take your 2 to 3 minutes to fill the feedback. It helps us in terms of improving our service delivery, as well as to give feedback to our facilitators for taking their time in facilitating these workshops that we are currently providing. So, and also the feedback also help us, colleagues, to get your information now in terms of issuing out the certificate of attendance. That is where we find all your details, your correct title, your correct staff or student number, and etc. And therefore, we can issue a certificate of attendance based on that record. So with that being said, colleagues, now allow me to introduce our facilitator, Prof. Pillay. I'll just going through her bio shortly. Professor Pillay joined Technikon Witwatersrand as a lecturer in chemistry on the 1st of July 2001 and is now 24 years in service at the University of Johannesburg. She is currently a full professor of analytical and environmental chemistry in the Department of Chemical Sciences at the University of Johannesburg. Her research interests are in developing nanomaterials for water treatment and forensic applications. She has to date hosted 7 postdoctoral research fellows and graduated 21 master's MSc students and 13 PhD students. She has published 94 journal articles in internationally accredited journals, 7 book chapters, 2 conference papers, and filed 1 patent. She has presented papers at 13 international conferences, has a Scopus Edge Index of 38, Google Scholar Edge Index of 40, and 4,051 citation. Prof. Pillay served the Department of Chemical Sciences as Deputy Head Department, Teaching and Learning for 3 years, and also represented this department on the Faculty Teaching and Learning Committee and Faculty Higher Degrees Committee. She currently serves as a Senate representative on the Senate Executive Committee of the University of Johannesburg. She has additionally served as a reviewer for several internationally accredited journals, as well as served on review panels for the National Research Foundation and Water Research Commission. That is Prof. Pillay. Colleagues, thank you once again, Prof, for joining us. We do hope and believe colleagues will learn something in this presentation of today. And thank you everyone, the colleagues who have taken their time to attend this workshop. We're looking forward to a productive and engaging as well as an insightful presentation. So thank you, Prof. Now I hand over to you. You can start with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ntuli. I'll be sharing my presentation shortly. Okay, can everyone see my slides? I think it's just loading.
Yes, Prof, is still loading on our site.
Okay. All right.
Yes, now it's visible, Prof. We
Okay.
can all see your screen.
You can all see it. Okay. Okay, so
Yes.
good morning, everyone. I think Mr. Ntuli gave you quite a comprehensive introduction, so I will not say too much about myself, except that I'm based on the Doornfontein campus. So if any of you wish to engage with me, that is where you will find me. So basically, we're going to unpack the role of external examiners, and I'm going to conclude with some ways in which we can source these external examiners. But I also thought, based on the experience that I've had as well with this, it's important for me to warn you of some red flags as well to watch out for when selecting these examiners. So basically, we're going to look at who the external examiner is, what role they play. And I thought it's important because some of us may be new at supervision and appointing examiners for our students. So I thought it's important to also go through the requirements and the processes that are followed for appointing these examiners. And we will conclude with where to source good external examiners, and also with some red flags, what to watch out for. So basically, this is what I consider to be an external examiner. It's someone who is an expert in your field of study, or a specialist, as we may put it. Obviously, you do not want someone that's not an expert in your field to examine your student. And it's someone who should not be directly affiliated to you or the university as such, but that's in a position to assess your student's dissertation or thesis in an objective and a fair manner. So basically, you want your student to get a fair examination, so you don't want the person to be someone that's directly affiliated to you or may have some kind of personal contact with you. Okay, now looking at the role that this external examiner plays in the assessment of your student, basically this is the person who decides on the future of your students. They can either make or break your students. So they issue that final rubber stamp, which says your student can graduate with a master's or a PhD degree. So it's important that the external examiner undertaking the role of examining your student's dissertation or thesis is familiar with the faculty and the institution's specific guidelines. Now, normally The faculties handle the examination process, so the examiner will get a set of guidelines or a template or a rubric that they need to use to assess the dissertation or thesis. So their first role will be to familiarize themselves with that, bearing in mind that different faculties and different institutions have different policies on this, right? And then I always believe that it's important for an examiner to check that the scope of the thesis or the dissertation falls within his or her area of expertise, because it's unfair to your student to get someone who's not an expert in that field to examine, because he or she knows nothing about that field. So how would they be able to engage the kind of contribution that your student has made to that specific field? So very often what I do is, if I get an invitation to be an external examiner, I basically ask to be given an abstract of the project. And I read that abstract, and based on that, I decide whether I have the expertise that's required. So it is important for external examiners to check this, because you cannot assess a thesis or a dissertation that falls outside your area of expertise. And it is the role of the examiner to read the thesis or dissertation very carefully, taking into consideration the specific criteria or guidelines under which he or she has to examine that thesis. So you cannot give a thesis a fair assessment without going through it thoroughly. You may get cases, and you can share your experiences with me later during the question and answer session, where sometimes you may read an examiner's report and you ask yourselves, did this examiner actually read the thesis? Because that's important. That's their role. They're given the document, they're supposed to read it thoroughly. So that is another role that they play. And also, while examining the thesis, they're supposed to check for technical and conceptual errors that may be in the thesis and the dissertation, bearing in mind that this is a document that's going to go out there into a community and be shared with other scholars in the field. So they've got to check that the technical and the conceptual aspects of the thesis. If there's anything that's conceptually incorrect, they need to point that out in the examiner's reports. And to some extent, it's also their role to check for minor typos, spelling, grammatical mistakes, and recommend these accordingly. Because that's important, bearing in mind that the thesis or the dissertation is going to be shared with the public at some stage. Something else that's very important in their role is for them to check for plagiarism and academic dishonesty. That's very important, because you don't want to recommend award of a degree to someone that's plagiarized someone else's work or passed off someone else's work as their own. Now, these are things that we as supervisors also check on, but it is important. And that's why our faculty has now put into place a mechanism whereby the supervisor doesn't only submit the thesis or dissertation to be sent out for examination, but they've also got to have the Turnitin report verifying that they've checked the percentage similarity and whatever before it goes out there, because external examiners are meant to check this, and they are meant to make a recommendation that, listen, this thesis or dissertation cannot pass because there's been academic dishonesty, and we have evidence that we can present. And also the external examiner has to be careful when making such accusations. He or she has to provide the substantive evidence to show that, you know what, yes, I've gone through the thesis and I've picked up certain sections were plagiarized from this document and so on. So that's very important as well. And many of you know that one of the key criteria for deciding whether a PhD gets awarded or not is evidence of original contribution. So it is the external examiner's role when assessing a PhD thesis to check the originality of the work that's presented to them. And also remember, along with the PhD comes publications. At UJ, we do have a rule whereby a thesis or a degree, a PhD degree doesn't get awarded unless the candidate has at least one publication. And this may differ from faculty to faculty, but it's important for the assessor to check the authenticity of the publication. Was it published in a reputable journal, or was it published in a predatory journal? So these kinds of factors need to be checked when the thesis or dissertation is being examined, right? And it is important for the external examiner to critique the thesis or dissertation. So any flaws that they have identified needs to be reported. It needs to be part of the examiner's report. And sometimes we as supervisors may be offended by this, but what we need to realize is we got to take some of the comments as constructive criticism to help the student improve the thesis or the dissertation before it goes out there in the community. The checking of the use of language and style is also important. The use of language has to be appropriate. Now, I'm coming from the scientific field where we have specific scientific terminology that we use. So it's important for examiners to check that the terminology is being used, the language is appropriate, there's not too many grammatical or syntax errors and so on. So the language has to be acceptable. Overall, examiners should also check the general presentation of the thesis or dissertation. Is it nicely organized into chapters with a table of contents, or is it something that is just being haphazardly put together? Just for the sake of submitting something for examination. And I know very often we as supervisors check these things before we give the student the green light to submit. But it's important for examiners to check this as well. And it's important for us as supervisors to be aware of what examiners are looking for so that we can guide our students and say to them, listen, you need to improve on your thesis or dissertation in this manner because the examiner is going to pick this up and that might affect the outcome and so on, right? And basically, the examiner's task is to get a general or holistic picture of the thesis or dissertation, present an overview of it in a formal report and highlighting the strengths and weaknesses. Now, it's important that the strengths and the weaknesses are communicated in an objective manner or in a professional manner where it doesn't show any bias towards the student or the supervisor. So it's important that the external examiner is someone that can give a fair and an unbiased assessment. So basically, compiling that examiner's report is an important task of the examiner. They've got to now say what is good about the thesis or dissertation, what is bad about the thesis or dissertation, and why, and really substantiate their points well, because it's got to be a clear and a fair assessment, which often gets checked by our faculty higher degrees committee as well. And then to some extent, the examiners have to be familiar with the different categories of assessment and make a recommendation based on that, and also justify why they're making that recommendation. Now, the typical categories we get is sometimes a thesis, if it's absolutely perfect, which is very rare, it can be passed without corrections, right? Or it can be passed with minor corrections subject to the approval of the supervisor. So the examiner makes the recommendation and says this and that and whatever needs to be corrected in the thesis, but I don't need to examine it again. The supervisor can oversee everything, right? So that's another category we get. And the third category is where it's totally rejected. Now, this is where the examiners really got to have their ducks in a row. Because if you are rejecting a dissertation or a thesis for any particular reason, you need to be able to justify why you are rejecting. And it has to be a strong substantiation that can be accepted by the faculty and the Senate as well. Then now I think everyone's aware of the changes that have occurred in UJ. The students is no longer only assessed on the basis of the written documents that they submit to examiners, but also in the form of a PhD oral defense, which is known as a viva voce. Okay, at the moment it's only being practiced for PhD students. And this is where the candidate gets an opportunity to present the highlights of his or her PhD thesis, and then the examiners get to engage on a one-on-one with the candidate and get to probe the candidate with questions that will enable them to make a decision on the final outcome. And one criteria in particular that they need to pay attention to is evidence that the candidate actually did the work. The candidate compiled that thesis by his or herself, and the work wasn't done by somebody. And one of the reasons why UJ has brought this into the picture is because very often students can get someone else to write the thesis or the dissertation for them. So how do we know? I mean, it's even difficult for us as supervisors to know that. So basically, the external examiner sees a written document in front of him, or her, and doesn't necessarily know whether the candidate did the work or not. So this PhD oral defense is now the right platform for the examiner to engage with the student and get a general sense of whether he or she did the work and make that final recommendation as to whether the degree should be awarded or not. And this is where the role of the external examiner does become a bit challenging, because while examining that written thesis, they've got to formulate questions that they're going to ask the candidate during the PhD oral defense that's going to enable them to gauge whether the candidate did the actual work. Now, this can vary from testing the candidate's knowledge of concepts to actually asking simple questions like, what original contribution are you making here? Or what value add is your PhD bringing to the community at large? So that's another important role that examiners play in this day and age. And it's actually a very big responsibility that they carry on their shoulders, because what we put out there into the real world is important. And the PhD oral defense is also a quality control measure. Okay, now just to quickly go through some of the requirements and the processes that are involved when selecting and appointing examiners, I just want to quickly go through the processes. Now, some of you who've done it already may be familiar, but there may be some of you who are new to supervision, and you probably have a student in a pipeline who's going to submit soon, and you want to know how does the process of nomination of examiners or assessors work. Well, basically, it's your responsibility as a supervisor to nominate the assessor. So you've got to identify examiners who are experts or specialists in the topic of the thesis or the dissertation. And then there's a special nomination of assessor form that's filled out and completed and signed by you and the co-supervisor. And together with that, you get the CV of the examiners as well, and you attach that and submit it to your department for approval. Now, different departments may operate differently. Our department has a specific committee that reviews the nomination of assessor applications and makes recommendation. Once the department approves the nomination of assessors, it then gets sent for faculty approval. So basically, it serves as the faculty higher degrees committee, where they review all the criteria, and then if they are satisfied, it gets forwarded to the Senate Higher Degrees Committee for final approval. If not, then it gets referred back to the department or the supervisor to actually change the examiner and whatever. So that's the basic processes. And then once the examiners are appointed, the faculty handles the whole examination process. So basically the supervisor only becomes involved again once the results are available. Then they communicate that to the student. And of course, the department is responsible for scheduling the PhD oral examination, which is basically the final hurdle in deciding on PhD candidates, right? So some of the requirements that we need to bear in mind when selecting an examiner. Ideally, the examiner should be in possession of a doctoral degree. This may differ from faculty to faculty. Some faculties may say, but never mind, it's only a master's dissertation, so therefore someone with the MSc qualification can also assess it. In some faculties, like my faculty, there's more stringent regulations. It has to be someone with a doctoral degree. Very importantly is that examiner has to show some kind of evidence of having published in your field. So he has to demonstrate expertise in that form. Something that we scrutinized very much in our department and even at faculty level is we look at whether the examiner has supervised postgraduate students to completion. Now, in the case of a master's dissertation, if they've supervised master's students to completion, that's fine. But in the case of the PhD candidates, we look at if they've also supervised PhD students to completion. Now, the reason why we place some emphasis on this is because we feel that examiners can only give a fair assessment if they themselves have supervised master's and PhD projects. It's good or a bonus if the examiner on his CV can show some evidence of having experience at having examined dissertations and theses before. Right? So that's an important criteria, because if they've got experience of having examined, then we don't need to question whether they're going to give a fair assessment or not. Very importantly, we do like the examiner to be affiliated with the university, because this is an academic engagement, right? But sometimes you may find that there may be someone who's not necessarily affiliated to a university, but they have enough expertise in that area of research to make them a suitable assessor. Now, in that case, the supervisor, when nominating the assessor, has to submit a strong motivation, qualifying why he or she believes that examiner is a good assessor to use, and that gets scrutinized by the faculty higher degrees committee, and they make recommendations accordingly. So these are not hard and fast criteria per se, and that's why I've highlighted them in red. But at the same time, supervisors need to bear in mind is if you are using an examiner that's not affiliated to a university, then you've got to really motivate why that examiner would be a good examiner for your student. Okay, and then something, there's always the do's and the don'ts. So something you should not do is nominate someone that's co-supervised with you in the last 5 years, or published or collaborated or even written a joint proposal with you. Now, our faculty allows a 5-year cooling period, as they call it, because if you've published 10 years ago with somebody, it can't really have an impact on how they judge your current research or your current supervision with the student. So if you've co-supervised, published, collaborated, or written a joint proposal with one of the examiners greater than 5 years ago, that's not a big issue. They can still allow it. But if it's fairly recent, within the last 5 years, it's not recommended, because then you're introducing some bias into the whole system. And ideally, it should not be a former colleague, but here again, our faculty introduces a cooling period. If the colleague has been away from UJ for more than 5 years, it's not a big issue. But if they've been a former colleague of UJ for less than 5 years, then we tend to discourage you appointing someone like that as an examiner. And there's provision made on the nomination of assessor form where you can declare this as well. And then I've highlighted the part about writing a joint proposal together in red. That's because it depends on whether your proposal was successful or not. You may have written a joint proposal together, but you may not have secured the grant and further collaboration may not have taken place. In that case, you can submit a strong motivation and the faculty can review it and decide whether they're accepting this or not. I had such a case where I wrote a joint BRICS proposal with a colleague, and the proposal was unsuccessful and we didn't continue working together beyond that. And so when I needed to use him as an examiner for the student, I then I wrote a motivation to faculty explaining everything, and they accepted the examiner. They allowed me to use him. So it all depends on whether the proposal has been successful or not. Okay, and then just while we're still on the requirements, we need to bear in mind that when appointing examiners for our PhD students, it's usually 3 external examiners that are appointed, and at least one of them must be an international examiner or affiliated to an international institution. For the MSc student, it's only 2 external examiners that are required. And here it's not hard and fast as to whether they are local or international. Now, sometimes you may have some unforeseen cases. For example, an examiner can pass away while he's in the middle of examining your student's thesis, or some other unforeseen circumstance can happen. And in that case, our faculty encourages supervisors to appoint a 4th backup examiner for the PhD student and a 3rd backup examiner for the MSc student. That's just in case of emergency where the examiner has passed on or something has happened that doesn't enable him to complete the examination, then you know you've got your fourth or your third examiner to recommend and get that. These are rare cases, but they can happen. When also selecting the examiners, you got to avoid using 2 or more examiners from the same institution, because if they do work at the same institution, they can communicate with each other, which can include or introduce some bias into the examination process. Something else that our faculty has encouraged is avoiding having all examiners from the same country. Now, we had this case in our faculty as well, where someone appointed all 3 examiners from India. And then when it was sent to Senate Higher Degrees Committee for approval, it was questioned there as to could the supervisor not find someone else from another country, and it was sent back. So we got to avoid these kind of things, and also avoid using visiting professors and distinguished visiting professors that may be affiliated to your department, right? Because they are associated, may not be directly associated with you, but it can include some bias into the process. You got to bear in mind that you cannot use the same examiner for more than 3 times over a 24-month period. That's important, because if you use the same examiner over and over again, that can include some bias into the whole process. Okay, so those are just some things that we need to bear in mind when choosing the examiners. Now let's come to, how do we source these external examiners? Where do we actually find them? Well, there's a number of platforms for us to find these experts that can examine our students. We often attend international and local conferences with the intention of setting up collaborations, but sometimes we actually fail to realize that this can be a platform where we can actually engage with experts in our field that can be future external examiners for our students. So international conferences, local conferences, whether they are in person or online or even just simple webinars, can be a platform in which we can find external assessors that are suitably qualified to assess our students. Something else to look at is who has recently published on the area of interest. A simple thing like you can go onto the library database website, choose whichever search engine you want to, or it could be Science Direct, it could be American Chemical Society, it could even be an educational resource. Type in the keyword, see what publications come up, see who's published in that field, and often the corresponding author leaves an email address. Then you can try emailing them to see if they are available to examine your students. In this sense, you can also use someone that's peer-reviewed your papers. For example, someone may have given a fair and unbiased assessment of your paper, and you like the way in which he or she has critiqued or helped you improve the paper, then you can go back to the journal and say you'd like to be in contact with the reviewer. And if the reviewer agrees for their details to be disclosed, you can then contact the reviewer and use them as an examiner as well. Something that also works very well is recommendation from other colleagues. You find that within a certain department, there may be more than one colleague working in a certain area or fields, and they may know examiners that are experts. They may have even had a pleasant or an unpleasant experience with an examiner that they can share with you. So they may say, don't use this examiner because this is what this examiner did to my student. Or they may even say, yes, this is a good examiner. I can get his CV for you and help you along. So recommendations from the colleagues also helps a lot. I know it has helped me in some way as well. And what you find is with time, your department or faculty can actually draw up a list of approved examiners. I know our faculty has got a list of examiners that are reputable. They've also got a list that they've red flagged for whatever reason. And so we can look at those lists and pick examiners from a pool to say, okay, I can't find anyone. No one's responded to my email, but let me go to the departmental list and see who I can use from there. So that helps as well. And it's also good to look at Google and Scopus profiles, also the Clarivate analytics, because that's where you will see highly cited researchers with high H indices which may be real experts in your field that you can contact. But this is also not hard and fast. You may find that some of these guys are so busy that they may not even respond to your emails, or they may agree to take on the examination, but they end up delaying your students. So one needs to exercise a bit of care. You can also identify some reputable institutions and look at the home pages of their departments to see if there's an expert in your field that you can contact. Sometimes your department or faculty may invite guest lecturers to give presentations. And while they're presenting, you may realize, okay, this person is working in the same field as I am. And that might be a good platform to approach the person and say, will you be interested in examining my student? And then sometimes we get postdocs and postgraduate students joining us from other institutions. For example, a student may have completed his master's in America and now wants to come study in UJ. You may find that they may know people at their institution that they can refer you to, or their supervisor who they worked with might be an expert in your field. So that's just a few guidelines that I have in terms of how we can strategically find these sort of external examiners. And then just to warn you of some red flags, and basically from my own experience, you can sometimes get examiners who agree to take on the examination process, but they can't deliver on time, and they may take very long to submit the examiner's reports, thereby resulting in the delay of the graduation of your students. So these are examiners we want to avoid, and that is why our faculty has drawn up a list of examiners that they've red flagged to make sure that supervisors don't use them again. And sadly, we do get these cases. I mean, I had a case where an examiner just never responded to the faculty officer, and then I had to appoint another examiner to take over the examination. I even had a case where an examiner was involved in an accident. He contacted faculty to say that he's had an accident and he needs more time, but he just never got back to them. And again, I had to step in and appoint another examiner. So we do get these cases, and we need to be wary of them so that we don't use those examiners again. And then you can get the other extreme, where an examiner can examine a thesis in one day and then decide to reject it. I had that case at the beginning of this year, where an examiner actually requested a resubmission. So the student made all the corrections that he suggested and resubmitted together with a rebuttal letter clearly explaining how he had addressed the different comments. But then the examiner examined it in one day and decided to totally reject the thesis. And fortunately for me, I read the examiner's report before the resubmission and after the resubmission, and I realized that the guy actually contradicted himself. in his first examination, before the resubmission, what he actually had stated is that it is a good thesis, it qualifies to be a PhD, and I just want to see it resubmitted for these 5 points to be addressed. So I was okay with that. I accepted that. The student addressed it and submitted it. Then he's given the thesis to submit. And in one day he says, this is not an original contribution. It's not a PhD. And doesn't even substantiate his point. So on that basis, I was able to convince faculty that we needed to ignore this examiner's recommendation and bring on board a fourth examiner who could assess it more fairly. So we do get these cases as well. And then you get some who just want to see this as a money-making process, and they request a resubmission over and over again. I also had this case where an examiner requested a resubmission, and then when we resubmitted, she sent it back and said she wants it resubmitted again. And then when I read the examiner's reports, I realized that the changes she wanted in the second resubmission did not correlate with what she asked for in the first submission. And then I realized, no, this examiner is just playing the system. So we then asked for an expert advisor to come on board and make a recommendation. And just to highlight to you, when you get a case where 2 examiners have passed and one has failed or one is faulty, usually what faculty does is they have mechanisms in place where you can appoint an expert advisor or an arbitrator to make the final decision. And it's usually the dean that appoints that person with the recommendation from the head of department, right? And then you can just get some examiners who are just biased for some reason or the other against the student and the supervisor. And that's why it's important that when we select examiners, we actually try to eliminate this element of bias as far as possible. Okay, so that's my 2 cents worth on this topic. I tried to keep it as brief and as informative as possible. So now I want to take this opportunity to thank you for listening to me. And I want to open the floor for a question and answer session where you can engage with me, or you may have had experiences of your own where you may need some advice, or even just share with us in general. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elaine. So I'm just standing in for Mr. Nkosi for a few minutes. But thank you for that presentation, Prof. Really enjoyed it. And like Prof said, we just like to open up the floor to anyone who has any questions. Please feel free to either pop a message in the chat, or alternatively, you can unmute your mic and you would be able to speak. I believe that we've enabled everyone's mic. So yeah, we'll just give it a few minutes. Please take this opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. Thank you. Hey, Prof, I think we're still waiting for a few questions to come in. We'll give it another minute or two.
Okay, that's fine.
Hello, good morning to you all. Prof, can I ask this question?
Yes, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. people are now asking, I will take this opportunity. Take it that mostly PhD candidates are not in UJ. They are in their various places. Take it that you have taken a supervisor, and in the course of your PhD candidacy, the supervisor is not able to supervise you based on, maybe as you're talking, it can be either because of sickness or maybe death, and you are far from the university. How do you contact the university to reassign you to another supervisor?
Okay, so I'm gathering your question is more related to supervision. So you're saying you're a PhD candidate, something has happened to your supervisor, so now you need to contact the university in terms of what happens, who takes over, who becomes your supervisor. Am I correct in understanding it that way?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, well, first of all, you've got a department that you must be affiliated to. So you contact the head of department, who may even have a postgraduate coordinator, explain to them your problem and ask them what happens now. Because the way I see it is if your PhD supervisor has fallen ill and is not in a position to supervise you any further, then what really is important here is that the head of department now needs to take responsibility and appoint someone else who can take over and oversee your project. So I would say that's the first point of call. Either contact the head of department or the postgraduate coordinator in your department, raising this concern and asking them who will take over your supervision. Okay, does that help you?
Very well. Another question is,
Yes.
when you have external examiners and one is not agreeing to pass you. Maybe there are 3 examiners and the 2 decide to pass you. How will that affect your graduation or your completion?
Okay, so usually what happens is once the examiner's reports are in, right? The supervisor has to submit a summary report summarizing all the examiner's comments and making a recommendation. So what your supervisor can do in that case is, based on the fact that 2 examiners have passed you and one is rejecting, they can either request faculty to permission to appoint a 4th examiner to come on board, or they can ask the dean to appoint an expert advisor or an arbitrator to deliberate on the final result. Okay, so that's usually the route that faculties follow if we get that case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Are there any other questions? Let me just see if there's anything on the chat. No, I don't see anything on the chat.
Prof, I have a question. I hope it's okay. Sorry, I joined the session a bit late.
Sure.
But I just want to find out in terms of, sourcing external examiners. Sometimes you have a student who, let's just say their project there's not a lot of research being done on it. Let's just say, for example, how do you go about selecting if there's no appropriate, let's just say no one exactly in the field that's available? How would you go about looking for alternatives? I'm not sure if you covered this in your presentation already.
Looking for alternatives. Well, the important thing is it has to be an expert in the field, because really you're shooting someone in the foot if you don't choose an expert. So yes, you would go through those various processes I suggested, maybe speak to a colleague who can recommend somebody, or look up Google Scholar and Scopus profiles to see who's published in that field. Someone that, or it's very rare. I think you're asking me if it's a new or an emerging field where not too many people have done work on that. Is that what you're asking? Because there may be certain fields where there are not too many experts available.
So the reason why I asked that, Prof, we
Mhm.
had an we've been experienced recently at a previous institution where one of the researchers, they started a new project and it was a very new area
Mhm.
of research. And what I noticed, and this was actually my friend, where they found it quite difficult to find an examiner because obviously this was like a new area of study. And the fear
Mhm.
that they had at the time was if we just appoint someone, let's just say, who has an idea of the general topic, let's just say drug delivery, but
Mhm.
not this specific area, that could lead to potential problems later on because, like we're saying, the examiner is not an expert in the field. They may not completely, they may come
Mhm.
up with maybe some questions that, can cause some
Yeah.
issues for the student. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really a difficult one. And to be honest, I've really not encountered such a case. Uh, from my experience, I think in that case, maybe you've got to get the faculty higher degrees committee or even the dean or the vice dean involved to actually look at CVs of potential candidates who may not necessarily be well versed with that field, but has some minimal expertise that can help the student. I think there you have to involve faculty a bit because really it's something that can come back to bite the supervisor and the student if the person doesn't know the field at all. It can work either way. It can work in favor of the student. So if the examiner knows nothing, he can say, "Ah, never mind, let's pass the student." And that can be a bad thing for you if it goes out there and if someone picks up faults. But on the other hand, the examiner may choose to fail the thesis because based on the fact that he knows nothing and he's thinking it's all wrong. So I really feel that faculty or some higher body needs to be involved in helping the supervisor and the department make the decision there. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those rare cases, but yeah, and honestly speaking, I've not encountered it. But yeah, in that case, I would think it's better to get a better, a more holistic picture from faculty how to go forward with that. Okay. I hope that helps to answer your question. I have one now on the chat box from Eddie Mulenga. He wants to know how is the remuneration or compensation package for external examiners calculated? Honestly speaking, Eddie, I don't know because I've not actually become privy to how much external examiners get paid. The only thing I can tell you is I was once used as an internal examiner for examining an MSc nanoscience student. And at that point in time, they were allowing internal examiners, and I only got paid 800 Rand for it, right? Because I was internal. My experience from having externally examined for other institutions is it can vary from institution to institution. I know I've been talking to my colleagues and they've examined for UNISA and they verified that UNISA pays very well. They can pay up to 7,000 Rand for the examination of a PhD thesis, and WITS is competitive but not that high. WITS University, for example, pays something like 3,000 Rand. And they get other universities that may only pay you something like 1.8, whatever. So it varies amongst institutions. Institutions have different guidelines. I think the best people who would be able to guide you on that is the faculty officers or the deans themselves, because they are familiar with the policies that are used to provide guidelines on how much external examiners get paid. Okay, so Eddie, I hope I've answered your question there. Then we have another one from, please pardon me, I need to pronounce it correctly, Omobolade. He says, thank you for the insightful session. If you are being appointed as an examiner and the institution is silent about you being an international or local examiner, how can someone address such? I reside in South Africa and I am Nigerian. Well, it depends on who you are actually examining for. If you are examining for a South African institution, the fact that you reside in South Africa, although you are originally Nigerian, is that you are seen as part of the South African community. So they may take you as a local if it is a South African institution. If it is an institution outside South Africa, they will see you as international. I think that's how it actually works. Okay. Omobalade, does that answer your question? Okay, I'm not sure if there's any other questions.
I think Prof will give it at least a minute or two, if that's okay with everyone. Don't want to cut anyone out.
Okay.
If you have any questions, please feel free to pop it into the chat, or you can just unmute your mic and Prof will be happy to address those.
Okay, we have a question from Beauty. Go ahead, ask your question. Beauty, you may go ahead. I think you need to unmute.
Okay.
Dr.
Good morning, colleagues. I just want to find out, I heard you saying that there was an examiner who was involved in an accident, and then the examiner notified you. Is it you or the faculty? But after the notification, the examiner did not get back to you and did not continue to to assess the student. You had to find another examiner. I just want to check how, like, the time frame, how long must you give the examiner to get back to you when they are in a crisis? Is it a week, 2 weeks? I just want to check that the time frame, if it's something that it is standard, and yeah.
Yes, look, just to clarify, once the thesis or dissertation gets sent out for examination, you as a supervisor are not allowed to contact the examiners. The communication takes place between the faculty officer handling the examination and the examiner. So that examiner that I spoke about contacted the faculty officer who was handling the matter to say he needed an extension. Typically, examiners are given 6 weeks. If they cannot complete the examination within that time frame, they need to inform faculty, and then faculty decides on the extension period. Basically, this examiner was given a month extra, but he couldn't come back to us, and therefore, because it was delaying my student, I decided no, I needed to step in and get permission from faculty to appoint another examiner to come on board. Yeah, so typically they don't. It depends. It may vary from faculty to faculty, but our faculty normally gives 6 weeks, and thereafter, if the examiner cannot meet that deadline, they allow a reasonable extension for up to a month. And thereafter, if the examiner cannot deliver, then they call upon the supervisor or the department to appoint another assessor. Okay, does that help you, Beauty?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Okay.
If there's any more questions for Prof, please feel free to unmute your mic or once again put your question in the chat box. We'll leave this open for a few more seconds if you have any questions to come in. And then afterwards, Prof, with your permission, we can close. But actually see there's a question in the chat, Prof.
Yes. Okay. It's a question saying, I think it's from Eddie again, as a research coordinator, how do you organize a PhD or a master's defense or examination? What are the requirements from the coordinator's end, either virtual or physically? Okay. Well, basically, in our faculty, the department handles it. And yes, the department appoints, well, we have a research administrator who will liaise with the supervisors and the examiners to check on the date of availability and then schedule it accordingly. Now, usually when there's international examiners involved, basically what happens is they try to arrange it virtually so that everybody's accommodated, and you don't necessarily have to have the examiner to fly over just to listen to the oral defense. So the research coordinator or administrator communicates with the supervisors and the examiners on their availability, and they all agree on a mutual date. There is also what is called a non-assessing chair that's involved. Now, this can be either the head of department or a senior colleague in the department who is not involved directly with the project, but is just there to facilitate the whole oral defense. So the supervisor appoints the non-assessing chair as well when they appoint the external examiners. In fact, on our nomination of assessor form, we do have a section where the non-assessing chair is specified. And then what happens is on the day of the actual oral defense, the research coordinator or the research administrator is merely there to oversee that everything is running smoothly. So if the examiners don't join virtually, he or she contacts the examiner to remind them that they've received a meeting invite. They must please join. And he or she is simply there to also record the meeting if necessary, so we can refer back to it if needed. And basically, the non-assessing chair is the one who chairs, welcomes the examiners, highlights the rules for a PhD oral exam. Then they give the candidate an opportunity to present, and then the examiners can ask questions, the audience can ask questions, and so on. So basically, the role of the research coordinator is mostly to set up the date and the venue and make sure that there's internet connectivity and whatever for the process to take place smoothly, and also to contact the examiners if any of them fail to show up at the virtual meeting or whatever. But that's and if it's the meeting is not being recorded, then the research coordinator records the minutes of that session. But it's mostly the non-assessing chair who's appointed by the supervisor that handles everything else. Okay. All right. Does that help you, Eddie? Okay, I'm not sure. I think there is going to be another workshop on the Viva. Am I correct on that? I'm not sure.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah,
Yes, we will have the Viva series, and that's going to be in September.
in
So,
September. Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
in September.
Yeah. So we
Mhm.
will provide, you'll get more information from that as well.
Hey, colleagues, so I guess this will be the your last opportunity. If you have any questions, once again, please feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and unmute your mic. If there's no more questions, and with your permission, Prof, I think we can end the session in the next minute, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine with me. Thanks.
Okay, colleagues, I don't see any chats coming in or any hands raised. So with that, Prof, I think it's safe for us to end the session. Prof, on behalf of the RCD unit, we'll just like to thank you once again for taking the time to put together this presentation. And, it's something we really enjoyed. Thank you for all of your effort. And for the audience, we thank you for attending this session as well. Can I just please put a reminder that the feedback survey form has been added to the chat earlier. Please, can we ask that it takes about 2 to 3 minutes for you to give us some feedback. And this is obviously used so that we can improve our offerings moving forward. Prof, so with that, is there any last words that you'd like to have before we close the session? Anything you'd like to say?
What I'd like to say is I'm going to share my email address on the chat box. If anybody who attended this workshop thinks of anything else they'd like to ask, they're welcome to email me.
Thank you very much, Prof. Really appreciate that.
Okay,
So
so
with that,
there's my email address coming up there. So feel free to email or engage with me. Or see Eddie wants the presentation shared. I think that will be shared by the RCD unit.
yes, Prof.
Okay. Okay, so I will email my slides through after this presentation for it to be shared.
Correct. Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you, colleagues, for attending the session. We hope you all have a great day, and we hope to see you in future workshops that we have coming up over the next couple of weeks. With that, thank you, and I'm going to end the session. Have a great day. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.